A billionaire property tycoon in Vietnam was sentenced to death on Thursday in the country's biggest ever case of financial fraud. Truong was found guilty of her role in the scam, siphoning $12.5 billion off Vietnam's largest bank. She's the chairwoman of Van Tin Phat Holdings Group and has for years been a central figure in the country's world of finance.
Welcome back, guys. I trust you've been staying safe. Today's true crime story is taking us to Vietnam, and the details of it are really crazy because, as it turns out, a 67-year-old woman by name Truong has been sentenced to death for embezzling close to $12.7 billion US. How did she do this? That makes up allegedly about 10% of the country's GDP. And how come it graduated from being a regular fraud case straightforward through to becoming a case that has been found worthy of the death sentence being applied? If you care to know, Vietnam is one of the countries that is really harsh on certain forms of crimes, one of them being white-collar crimes, and then another being the trafficking of narcotics. But it seems that the gravity of this case of Truong and these fraudulent transactions that have been uncovered to the tune of estimatedly $12.7 billion US is one of its kind. Apparently, it's alleged that it's one of the, no, not even one of the, is the biggest white-collar fraud ever in the history of Vietnam as a country. I'm yet to confirm if that is accurate, but that is what the allegation is out there. But the question is, how does this 67-year-old woman, who in actual fact is seen proud to this as a philanthropic wonder and a mentor to several people, get to graduate from being in this kind of limelight to then becoming now seen as a fraudulent person, and she is now sentenced to death? Truong is actually the chairwoman of the Van Tin Phat group, and this group, if you are familiar with it, is one of the biggest groups in Vietnam. She is one of the millionaires, dare I even say billionaires, in that country. So little did anybody expect that she would be caught up in a situation where she would end up being accused of orchestrating the Saigon Commercial Bank's operations to embezzle $12.7 billion US equivalent from this privately held bank. But how did she do this? First of all, she has currently been charged on 3 key things. The first being bribery, the second being violation of banking regulations, and then the third being embezzlement. But as is expected, her being this wealthy, she wasn't alone in this scheme per the investigation that came out. So apparently 85 other individuals have also been picked up by the police, and the police are proposing prosecuting all of these 85 other individuals on charges which include embezzlement, violation of banking regulations, bribery, abuse of power, neglect of duty leading to serious consequences, and the misuse of trust to misappropriate assets. And guess what? Of these 85 people, her husband allegedly is one of them. And I think in as much as this is in the negative light, it also goes to show how grounded their love is. They are in the good, and it seems in this case that they are also together in the bad. But then, Truong is also charged with fraudulently acquiring assets through bond issuance and money laundering. But then these charges are going to be treated separately because further investigations are being conducted into them, and when the findings are complete, there's going to be prosecution on these, serving as another case in itself. So this 67-year-old so-called business tycoon, Truong is in for a hell of a time in the years ahead. That is how I see this. Because you're already facing a death penalty for these 3 charges leveled against you. And as if that is not bad enough, there's also another pending case still being investigated and a possible prosecution on it building up. So even if you beat the first one, the second one is coming. But then another flip side of this is being who she is and being where she is. It's also expected she has certain connections, and it's alleged that her legal team is claiming they are going to fight the judgment of her being sentenced to death. I don't know if they are going to be successful, especially since it seems that this particular type of fraud has affected the GDP of the country to an extent, because it looks like this 12.7 billion US dollars might not be able to be recouped by the state. Maybe they could recoup certain assets and try to liquidate just to reclaim some of the amounts, but I doubt they would be able to reclaim everything to the tune of that 12.7 billion US dollars. So there's another twist to this, because one would expect that the whole thing was done and dusted. But then, it is being alleged that Truong is actually claiming that she is not responsible for any of this, but that it is her subordinates who did the whole thing. Now, let's also get into the other bit of how it played out. Truong is charged with orchestrating all these things by issuing fake loans. Now, she's also charged with fraudulently acquiring assets through bond issuance and money laundering. And then, as a result of these things, it is also expected that some of the banks are also suffering, because this has affected liquidity to an extent. Now, while Truong was not holding an official position, she had effective control on the bank because of her majority stake, and her majority stake ranged from 85% to 91%. So it's almost like she owned the bank. And this was because the 3 banks that made up this SCB bank were merged together to form that SCB bank in 2012, and the remaining shares of less than 10% were held by over 4,000 small investors. So it is obvious that Truong was the majority shareholder, holding up to almost 90% of the shares of this consolidated bank. And there are interesting days ahead, because it goes on to also indicate that Truong, after doing this, then placed relatives of hers in key leadership positions at this SCB bank, such as the board of directors and the executive board, all in an effort to serve her interests. Now, Truong then allegedly used this SCB bank as a vehicle to raise capital, and then instructed people at this same SCB bank and the Van Thing Fat to create bogus loan profiles to make it possible to withdraw the raised money. So that is the modus operandi by which she allegedly executed this fraud. And I think that it is very, very unfortunate, exactly in an era where women are changing the narrative and showing that they are really capable of doing clean and authentic business and breaking barriers and setting trends. I think that this takes away from that vibe where a woman that seemed seemingly successful and genuine has now been caught up in this situation to the point that she is now even being sentenced to death. Now, as of the time of making this content, the police in Vietnam had seized some assets of Miss Truong to the tune of nearly 15 million US dollars, and also thousands of real estate properties, luxury cars and yachts, and also frozen nearly 8.5 million US dollars owned by the other defendants and restricted certain transactions on their accounts. So these are interesting days ahead. For Truong My Land, she has been sentenced to death, but it's alleged her legal team wants to fight the case. Meanwhile, there's a second case also building on money laundering and others. And I don't know how this will play out. If the death sentence is carried out, what happens to the second case? I'm just thinking out aloud. But I think that it is about time that society realizes that not all that glitters is gold, assuming this is true. There is a lot of diligence, there's a lot of respect and value in doing honest work. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer for you to break through, but the honest work in itself is a blessing that will fuel the foundation of whatever you are doing to make sure that it rises, such that even if you fail and you are still diligently pursuing the course, there's a higher probability it will pick up. And when you finally hit your stride and you excel and you are blossoming, you can sleep and sleep well, knowing very well that you were diligent and integrity was at the foundation of what you did, such that you won't hit the pinnacle of where Miss Truong My Land has hit, only to now have debt being pulled up on you and everything that you've built in this empire crumbling down. There are interesting days ahead. I'm following this case to see how things would play out. As and when there is any crucial update, you can count on me to bring it to you. But what do you think? Is there anything else you know about this case that maybe I didn't touch on? What do you think about what the accusation is? And most importantly, what do you even think about the sentence? I am in Africa, and I know some people would be happy if such decisions by the courts are introduced to certain countries here, because it's alleged that there's a lot of corruption. Subscribe and turn on post notifications. I'll catch you on the next one.